So we have just 4 questions usually, right? When you're hiring, when the candidate passes phone screening with HR or recruiter, for example. So, and you have a face-to-face or maybe phone interview, right? So, and what are you looking for in the candidate? That would be the first question.
Yeah. Well, so usually the process here at Hulu is pretty standard. Like you talk to a recruiter, and then the recruiter's takes a bunch of notes, and then sends that feedback over to me, and I review that feedback and I say I want to talk to this person or I do not want to talk to this person. And if I want to talk to them based on the feedback from the recruiter, then I move forward. I get on a conversation with them on the phone, and again, pretty standard hour-long conversation where half technical, half just talking about values, behavioral sort of questions. In that, like what am I looking for? It's really the 5 qualities that I look for in people that are the most important to me are what that I'm trying to assess in that initial conversation and throughout the interview process is can I make an assessment of this person's quality of work? What is their actual quality of work going to be? Also, I try to, as I'm doing the technical assessment, also trying to assess how much output will this person produce. So also, do they think quickly? Do they move quickly? Do they think of questions quickly? So quality and quantity of work. Also, how well do they collaborate? Like I try to set the stage right at the top of the interview. Like this is supposed to be collaborative. You're supposed to ask me questions if you have them.
Right.
The questions that I ask are open-ended because I want to challenge them to come back and ask me questions, and I want to know like that this person's going to be collaborative with their peers when they have questions. And kind of jumping off that, also just how well do they communicate like during the interview process? Yeah. Again, are they consistently talking about their thought process and just how effectively we're building that relationship over the phone. And then the last 2 is I'm making an assessment on, is this person a leader? Like I think members of my team, members of the quality team, they are leading on, they're the quality leaders in the organization. They're not the only ones owning quality, but they're leading quality. And advocating for it every day. So I'm making an assessment like, can they be leaders within the engineering organization? And then lastly, I'm making an assessment on what is this person's focus on the customer? Like how effectively do they advocate for the customer, think about the customer? So I have a bunch of questions that I asked during the interview process, which is maybe leading to your second question, that where I try to dig into that and make that assessment of those 5 qualities.
Awesome. So what do you have any favorite interview questions?
Yeah, so I took some notes to remind myself.
I would write it down as well, guys.
Yeah.
We are recording just in case.
Yeah. The trick is I'm going to tell you the questions. I'm not going to tell you what's a good answer or a bad answer. So that's in your court. So one question that I like to ask, I'm going to give you just, I'll give you a few that I like and I ask consistently. One I ask consistently is, why did you choose software testing as your career? And a lot of people, and myself included, like after college, I kind of fell into software testing, and it's maybe something that you just start off initially. Maybe you're not very passionate about it. Like when I have a computer science degree, and in college, they weren't teaching me how to test. It was a discipline I learned like on the job. But the reason I asked that is I want to hear from them, and maybe that's their story. Maybe they kind of fell into it after college, but the follow-up that I asked to that is like, why do you stick with it? Like, why are you choosing to actually make that career? Why don't you pivot and do program management or development or something else? So that's one of the ones that I ask.
That's a good one.
I also ask, hey, at your current job or your most recent job, like what is the testing process there? I want to hear you kind of synthesize that back to me. How do you test at your current company? And I want to hear them articulate that. And then again, I have a follow-up question is, choose one way you would improve that process. Like if you could go to engineering leadership and say, like, let's make a change. The reason I ask that is just, is this a person that thinks like we can always be improving, always be always be just tweaking things to be a little bit better?
Right.
Is this a person that's critically thinking about those things? So that's another one. What other ones do I want to tell you about? Another one I ask is, tell me about a time you disagreed with your manager and what was the outcome of that? The reason I ask that is I absolutely require that I hire people that are smarter than me. I hire people that know things that I don't know. And sometimes I might say, let's do this. And it's the wrong decision, or they have another opinion, and they need to speak up and they need to say, actually, I think we should do something a little bit different. I want people that aren't afraid to speak truth to power or speak up when they think myself or anybody else is going down a wrong path. So I want to hear about times where they've done that previously. I'm not going to tell you my technical question because I have like my pet question that I like to ask, so I'm not going to tell you that one. But in the technical question, again, what I'm looking for, and I think we'll get into this in the next section again, is do they ask good questions? Or actually, you know what, I'll save that for the next section. But I'm looking for, again, the first quality is like the quality of work, how well they're communicating to that, how well they're collaborating. Maybe I'll do one more. I asked the person, if you had a magic wand and your next job was just perfect, like you could just wave it and your next opportunity is exactly ideally suited to you, it's your perfect job, what would that look like for you? And I want to hear them articulate what that perfect job looks like. What do they want to learn? What do they want to experience? Who do they want to collaborate with? What do they want to do? What do they want their day-to-day? How do I technically want to grow? Those are the things I want to hear from them. So those are some of my favorites.
Awesome. I like it. And question number 3, what are red flags for you?
Yeah. So to provide some context to this one, like my philosophy is I would rather not hire a great person than accidentally hire the wrong person. So my questions are kind of like I have that in mind. So for example, during the technical portion, this happens sometimes. The question that I ask you, if you bought a book on technical interviews, you would read this question. And if you go to like one of the many sites that help you polish your skills in a technical interview, you'll probably stumble on this question. But what I found, and the reason I keep asking it, is occasionally I have a person that in 30 seconds, they write a solution to it. But guess what? I have ways of digging into that and understanding, did you just memorize the solution or do you actually understand the question? So getting to a red flag, a person that will write code, and as I dig into it, I figure out this person actually doesn't understand the code that they wrote or why this is the solution, which happens more often than you'd think. That to me is a big red flag, someone that will write code and not understand what it does. Also, the question that I ask has some edge cases, and frequently what I'll see is people will rush to provide fixes in that. So they'll quickly put a special case in the code, or they'll quickly add what they think will resolve that edge case, rather than taking a step back and taking a moment to think about, wait, why is this an edge case? Why is it a special case? So people that are quick to just like, oh, that'll fix it, without like really critically thinking about it, it's a red flag for me. And then also, believe it or not, people write code and they get to the end of it and they don't test it. I'm interviewing test engineers, quality engineers, SDETs, and frequently they get to the end of an algorithm implementation, and what I want to see is like it's just a knee-jerk reaction that they just lead right into testing, and again, believe it or not, frequently that doesn't happen. So those are for me some of the technical red flags. Others already hit on. Someone that won't ask questions, is afraid to ask questions. During, like, again, I'm asking open-ended questions. I'm expecting someone to follow up with clarifying questions that scope the problem for them, and I'm looking for someone that will do that. Again, somebody that if they're in the day-to-day job, if they don't know what to do or how to do it or how to test something, but they're going to speak up and ask those critical questions, or just ask for help when they need it. Like, we all need help sometimes, and if they're just going to sit at their desk and spin their wheels for 3 days rather than ask that important question, like, that's something I want to try and suss out in the interview. And then occasionally this happens in interviews. I understand interview nerves are a thing. You get to the interview, you want to impress the interviewer, but frequently what I find is I'll ask a question, and you've practiced a bunch, and the answer that you provide actually doesn't answer the question that I asked. That happens, and again, I know it. I chalk it up to interview nerves. That's not like immediately disqualifying, but somebody that, I want to have a collaborative conversation. I want to communicate well with this person and start, even in the interview, start building a relationship with them. And I want to see that they can do that with me. So that's one. And then lastly, in the red flags is, personally, I don't like arrogance, and occasionally I'll stumble across somebody that has just a sort of inflated sense of self. It's fine if you're self-confident. I want them to be confident in their abilities, like that's a must. But occasionally there's somebody that just is a little arrogant, and that's just personally a quality that I don't particularly care for.
Yeah, makes sense.
A couple of yellow flags I have. These are just yellow flags, not red, but occasionally there will be candidates that they're just looking for any job, and I totally understand that, but they don't want my job, they want any job. And I get it, like, you have to make money, you have to pay rent, you have to buy food, and I get that, but occasionally it just is very clear to me, they'll say something or do something that's like, that kind of tips that hand of, I don't really care about your job, I just really need a job, and I would just try to hold that back, like try to seem pumped about the job that's on the table right now, right in front of you. And then, again, just a yellow flag, but I personally like people, and I always reserve time at the end of the interview for, like, I'm the hiring manager in a lot of cases. Like, do you have questions for me? And a lot of times people aren't preparing questions to ask me. Like, I'm your future boss, and you don't want to ask me anything about who, the job, the team, the work, the tech.
Like tech, right?
Yeah, so that's a yellow flag as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right, and do you have any resume tips and hints?
Yeah.
Like, what is catching your eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, especially in a quality field, to me it's very important, like, typos stick out to me. I'm looking for typos, grammatical errors, like those things in a resume. Like, I think your resume needs to be bulletproof. And again, especially in a quality area. If I've hired a lot of people that English is not their first language, and that's fine. Their resume was still bulletproof. So my advice there is, even if English is your first language, but maybe you just aren't the world's most gifted writer, give your resume to a friend, to a colleague, to your mom, to your girlfriend, to whoever it is, and say, please read this for me and tell me if there's any grammatical errors, typos, like just anything like that. That's my advice there.
Right.
And then if you really want a job, my advice to you is, it's very easy to just these days, jump on LinkedIn and apply to 50 jobs and put yourself out there and hope you get a bite. But if you really want a job, if you're like, that's the job I want, my advice to you is take the time to look at the job description, look at your resume, and it's fine if, like, I don't require a 100% match usually, but definitely take the time. And if I'm calling things out, I wrote the job description. I took the time to say, this is what I want. And if you want that job, take the time to maybe make some updates to your resume, or even take key phrases or experiences that I'm calling out that I'm looking for, and that if those map with your experience, like, make sure those make their way into your resume. Because when I get a resume from Kristen, like, I am taking seconds, maybe minutes, to review that resume to say, like, yes, I want to talk to this person, no, I don't want to talk to this person. So you have like a very small window of opportunity to kind of get your foot in there. And updating your resume to speak to my rule, like, will make that more likely.
Yeah. Any suggestions about the length of the resume?
It's a good question. There probably is, like, you can probably go one way or the other. That, like, I've seen resumes that are 10 pages, I've seen resumes that are 1. Both are probably fine. I'm probably not making it to page 7. Like, I'm probably looking at the last couple jobs and seeing what those were. Also, just bullet points help. Like, you know, if you have programming language experience, just programming languages and calling them out. And I'm just gonna peruse that list and be like, there's Java, there's Python, there's Selenium, there's JUnit, there's TestNG. Like, I'm gonna look for some of those key words, and the easier make that for me so I don't have to do a scavenger hunt. Like, again, just more likely that I'm gonna say, like, looks good to me. So you can go one way or another. Like, I think my resume these days is probably 3 pages, 4 pages, which, again, like, there's probably lots of schools of thought about what's too long or too short. You could go too short and you have 1 job on there, but you graduated from college 20 years ago. That may make me scratch my head about what you have to hide. But again, there's probably just some middle ground that's happy.
Right. Awesome. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? We have some couple questions. Yes.
So when choosing a candidate you want to interview, do you prefer people who have actual work experience in the field, or let's say, the question is, would you consider TestPro graduates or people who actually have the automation experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would depend on kind of the role, the company, the team. Like, so I can tell you, so I've been at Hulu for about a year, and in my time here, I've primarily been focused on highly technical, like, SDET role. However, at my last job, I worked there for about 4 years, and I built the quality organization there. And during that time, I was hiring, and one of those, I won't embarrass him, but there's somebody in the room that I hired at that job that had literally no experience in software development, testing, or anything in the field. And at that time, I very much enjoyed teaching and mentorship. I probably should have been a teacher in a different life, and who knows, like, maybe in some other life I will be. But I enjoy that. So in that case, I enjoyed, and members of my team enjoyed, teaching this person software development, how test fits into the software development lifecycle. So at the right company, in the right role, on the right application, like, it can be somebody with literally no experience. And I really enjoyed that process. At Hulu, I currently work on a back-end services, the subscription. I should have introed myself about who I am and what I do. I manage the quality team for the subscription services platform, so it's all back-end. And in this area, I found that I really need a lot of technical ability to successfully test this area and the integration testing and the testing we need there. So more recently, I've been more focused on highly technical testers, but there's absolutely a different companies, different roles, different software has the need for both. So yes, I guess, but maybe not right now or not right this second.
When you're interviewing a candidate, besides the amount of experience, the years of experience that they have, what other signals do you use to determine like the level of experience that they have, as far as like, you know, if you're going to place them in junior, mid, or senior?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do have like additional questions that I asked during. Again, I have the resume in front of me and I can see like, you know, graduated from college 2 years ago or 20 years ago. And frequently, like on the technical, the people that graduated 2 years ago, because technical interviews are just fairly contrived usually in that initial screen, I find that people that graduated 2 years ago frequently do better on that than people that graduated 20 years ago. And I just have that context in my head. So other questions I ask are like, have you ever written a test plan? And most people with any experience, yeah, I've written a test plan. And then again, the follow-up question is like, how did you go about it? And that sort of experience that I'm looking for is, how do you take a web page like GoodRx, how do you take that and break that down into its component parts to build a test plan off of? So a very experienced tester can like crank that, or they have a story to tell there about how they're just very methodical about taking something very large and breaking it down into its component parts. Maybe a newer tester is not quite as deliberate in their process. Also, all my questions are kind of, another one is like, or maybe in the what's your ideal next job, like that also, like that question frequently, people that have more experience, like the answers I hear there are generally a little bit different than the person that just graduated from college and they're really excited that we have beer on tap.
What beer?
Where is that?
There's a bunch.
Yesterday,
There's a
yeah.
bunch of.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Any others? Yep.
You like to be asked questions. Is there a question that you would like to get as an interview?
That's a really good question. A question that I like that I get every once in a while is, if I get the job, what would be the most important or highest value thing for me to jump in and focus on? What problem should I try to solve first? I think that's interesting. People ask me what my favorite thing is about Hulu or wherever I'm working. I like that as well. It seemed like at work we spend so much time with each other, and like I want to hire somebody that I can stand to be around for 8+ hours a day. So that person that's like, what's your favorite thing about Hulu, or is asking about the culture as well. To me, that's a person that's like really cares about that. I really care about it, and so hearing about that is always nice. If we haven't hit on the technical side, if they're interested in like, hey, what technologies do you use? Are you using Kafka? Are you using AWS? Like, people that ask those questions too, again, are triggers of like, okay, this person's like very passionate about something, and they're asking those questions. Those are maybe a couple of them that I like. Yeah. There's another question back here.
Yeah, what technologies are you using to do backend testing for your subscription?
Yeah, we use a few. For the most part, in subscriptions on the services platform, we use a open source test framework that Intuit developed, and it's called Karate DSL. And what it is if you're familiar with Gherkin syntax, which a lot of people probably are from like Cucumber, Behave, Lettuce, Robot Framework. It's an API testing framework or a backend service testing framework, and it uses Gherkin syntax. So, for example, like when you're testing an endpoint and sending a payload and expecting a specific response body back, you're doing all that through Gherkin syntax. The reason we selected it is because in the subscription area, it's payments, accounting, billing, invoicing, customer management. The reason we selected that is some of our stakeholders, for example, are like accounting, and accounting wants to look at our test cases and understand what they do, what we're covering, what we're missing, and that was one of the compelling reasons. Another was maybe to speak to the first question I was asked. A couple people on my team currently are they're not what I would call software engineers. They are somewhat technical, but they aren't software engineers, but they understand what an API is and they understand how a backend service works. And those people are, if I threw them at JUnit and I said ready, set, test, like they might be a little bit slower, or there might be a technical stumbling block there. And this framework also facilitates just quickly building out a breadth of test automation coverage fairly rapidly from non-technical people. And we can get that also feedback on our test coverage from non-technical stakeholders.
What's the name of the framework?
It's called Karate DSL.
Oh, correct.
Yeah.
DSR, DSL.
DSL. Like it's like domain specific language or something. You had a follow-up?
So you said you had accountants doing test case review for you guys?
Yeah, so our AC Ops team, our accounting ops development team, collaborates very, very closely with the accounting department. And and that includes dev and test. So test frequently, similar to, if you're doing a test plan review and maybe the product, and it's for a web app, maybe you're getting the product manager's feedback into your test cases. This is very similar. The accounting use cases are coming directly from the accounting department, and they want input into the accounting test plan. They want to review it. They'll have feedback. Very frequently they'll say, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about this permutation? What about that edge case? So we get a lot of valuable feedback from them, especially given that they can understand what the automation does.
So once you're done with the phone screening and you decide that yes, this candidate is worthy enough to bring on site, prior to making that actual decision, do you guys send them like a take home or like a leak code or?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, we don't. So the process is Kristen does a screen and she has some questions she likes to ask, and then I gave her some questions that I don't need to ask and I want to have them be a bar before I talk to the candidate. So she asked those, she shares that with me, I review it, I review the resume, I say let's do it or not. I do a 1 hour screen with the person, and then after that, if the candidate's local and they did well, like we'll jump right to on-site. It's not that costly. If they're out of state and we're gonna have to fly them and it's gonna be 2 weeks from now and do a hotel and a rental car and food and just all of the things in order to do an on-site. And based on that technical screen, the phone screen that I did, sometimes I'll say, let's do one more phone call with the person, and it'll be a member of my team, and they'll just kind of double check my work. I'll have in mind well, already if they're talking to that person, I'm like, yeah, probably we want to bring them in. But that person will tell me, sometimes they'll say I think no, and I listen to that. Sometimes they'll say absolutely yes, let's do an on-site, and we move forward with the on-site. Kristen and I have talked about ways to tweak our interview process. Again, I feel like it's pretty like standard like interview process, but I'll read things about how Slack does interviewing or other companies that I feel like their interview process is very innovative. Like Slack has an engineering blog that post where they talk about their interview process, and I was like, this sounds incredible, where they're having people write pull requests, check it into a repository, writing tests for it. The on-site is very much like a day in the life of what they would do, and I think it sounds very interesting, and I haven't heard anything about it. Someday I want to like get to the point where I try something like that, but haven't got there yet. That's a very long-winded answer to your question.
What's the ratio of hiring and on-site interview to hire?
So how many, if we bring 10 people in for an on-site, how many of those do we hire? That's a great question. Kristen probably does have metrics around that. I feel like once we get to on-site, it's pretty good hire ratio, but I would say getting to an on-site is much, much harder. I would say, I don't know, what would you guess, Kristen? What would you guess from phone screen with me? How many, if I interviewed 10 people, is it like one that we do it on-site?
I mean, I don't know technically what the phone screen to on-site percentage-wise looks like, but I mean, probably closer to 60 or 70, if I had to guess, and then it probably dwindles from there. So from phone screen to on-site, and then from on-site to offer. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like once we do commit to an on-site, we're feeling pretty good about this candidate, and we've uncovered a lot of stones by that point. That there's maybe some red flags still like hiding in there, but we've uncovered a lot of those. It's a great question. I wish I could actually answer that.
Follow-up question to this one. So there is different ways to get resume onto your file on your desk, basically. So there is LinkedIn, other maybe recruiting companies, and so on. What the shortest way, easiest way to get on your desk with the resume on your desk? So
you pull
go
out
around
your
or
back
something.
pocket right
Yeah, get into your office somehow, put it on your table.
Generally, I mean, Kristen is the
I think it'll be through me.
Yeah, she's private.
Yeah.
But you're receiving all these resumes through different ways, right? Like somebody email is to you, it's going through your website or LinkedIn or something like that. Do you guys hire like recruitment companies or something like that?
So we do not. We have an in-house recruiting. We have a bunch of recruiters. We have about, I think, 6 technical recruiters. So for the most part, our job is to really go through applied-ins. If the bucket of applied-ins is not where we would like it to be, we create more of a pipeline by reaching out through LinkedIn. I know that just reaching out to my LinkedIn will not do anything for you because I really don't check it. There's just a lot happening in there, and
I check mine.
Nick checks his, so you can reach out to him. I do have my business cards here today for you guys. If you guys want to connect with me or email me or whatever you guys want, but I always tell everyone, and I mean it. If you ever need anything, like, feel free to reach out to me. I've been around here for a while, and if it's not my direct role, I know who else to reach out to. So, yeah.
Last one question.
One more. Maybe, did you already ask the question?
Not to you.
Oh. Go ahead.
You had said you don't necessarily expect a 100% match between the resume and the job description. So there's a baked-in assumption here. You've got a candidate you really like, but there's one skill gap in there. Is that someone that you're going to bring on and maybe train internally, or expect them to take a class, or maybe some combination there?
Yeah.
Or is that sort of, how do you work through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say if it's like, if I'm hiring like a full-time permanent employee, if I'm hiring like a consultant or like a contractor, like that person's like pretty rigid, like they need to check like 99% of the boxes. If it's an FTE candidate, it kind of depends on the skill gap. If it's like they know how to program in Python and I want them to write Java, I don't care. Like they can learn Java on the job. If they've used some other test framework and we use this test, like I highly doubt anyone in here has ever heard of karate, let alone used it. So that's an example of like, maybe if you had gherkin syntax like experience, like through Cucumber or something, it would be like, oh, that's good. But I don't expect anyone to have experience with that framework. So it kind of depends on what exactly the skill gap is. But I definitely see, like when I hire someone, I definitely see it as like an investment of, we will invest in this person, we're going to teach them, we're going to give them, like I even think it's like a good thing that they're like, I don't know everything and this is going to be opportunity for me to learn some new things. Like that's what I want to do. I don't want to go to a job where I'm like, I already know how to do everything you guys do. Like I'll be bored in a week. So I think people probably want the same thing. So I think it's good for engagement and relationship building that we invest in people in that way.
All right, thank you very much, Nick.